I was going to say all these things about being prompt, and so 10 o'clock we're supposed to start, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to this session. Um, sorry. Jaime Garzon is our first speaker. Ecosystem services provided by overseeding Eschanomene into Bahia grass pastures in South Florida. One thing, just like the rules are the same as they've been all along. The next speaker is not yet here, so when that happens, we're just going to leave the 15 minutes. So if you have questions for him, he gets to answer 15 minutes more questions. Yeah. So, Lynn, maybe. Thank you, Jaime.
Thank you. Well, that was unexpected. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, and of course for being here assisting my presentation. My name is Jaime Garzon. I am here just to show you some of the results that I have from my dissertation at the University of Florida. But as you will see at the end, actually, at this moment I'm working at the University of Maine, so don't be confused by that. To begin with, just for the people that are not familiar with the United States, the state of Florida is a state that is located in the southeast part of the country. It has approximately 4 million of hectares in grasslands, and from those, approximately 85% are dedicated to beef cattle production. And of course, looking at the relation there, that is also related that many of those exploitations are in grazing management. Because of that, one of the main goals and concerns of the producers is how to return the nutrients and make those pastures resilient and sustainable in the time. Well, one of the main options for that is the fertilization. The problem with that is that actually nowadays we know that the prices of the fertilizers has becoming higher and higher, and currently is not that profitable just to apply the same amount of fertilizers as happened before. Because of that, the producers now are looking for another methodologies and other possibilities to return these nutrients. And one of those is the establishment of legumes. That is not a new topic, has been existing from many decades ago, but now because of this, the producers are more aware and they want to give that opportunity of the legumes. Now, I want to introduce you with the Eschanomene americana. This is a warm season annual legume that is native from the southern United States. That is very good because it's well adapted to the soil conditions and the environment in Florida. And actually, you can find this legume in Georgia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, and in some parts of Texas. It prefers wet soils and acid soils, so that's very good for our soils in Florida. And as has been studied from many years from the past, Professor Sollenberger started like a very good study with the Eschanomene. He was just giving the results with productivity. There are also studies reporting nitrogen fixation and the response of this Eschanomene to cattle production, to animal performance. However, nowadays we have the technology and the knowledge to analyze other ecosystem services that the legume can provide, as happened with the regulation of greenhouse gases, as nitrous oxide, the impact on litter decomposition, and of course, how the use of this legume will impact the microorganisms in the soil. Knowing that, the hypothesis that we have in my dissertation was that the association of Eschanomene with Bahia grass, that is a tropical grass, C4, very well adapted as well to the soil and environment in Florida, the association of those two plants will increase herbage accumulation and nutritive value. And also, overseeing Eschanomene will reduce nitrous oxide emissions, as being a legume, and also enhance the nitrogen cycling microbial gene abundances in the soil. To test that hypothesis, we performed my experiment in the Ranch Cattle Research and Education Center. We are located, we're part of the University of Florida, and we are located in the southwest part of the state. You can see in the map is the part of the inside the red circle. For this experiment, we deployed it in 2 years. We analyzed that from April to May 2019 to 2020, and again in 2020 to 2021. And we decided to do this in two different areas just to try to avoid that carryover effect that we could have from our treatments or from the establishment of Ashinomene. But we tried to maintain similar characteristics in those soils. So at the end, we could plant it in a soil with low pH, kind of acidic, a low concentration of phosphorus, medium concentration of potassium, and high concentration of magnesium and calcium. For the experiment, we deployed the project in a randomized complete block design with 4 replicates in a split plot arrangement. And with that, we tested 2 different treatments. The first one, the forage system, we established the whole experiment in an already planted, established Bahia grass pasture from many years before of that. So here the treatment was making the blocks and the main plots, having the plots with Bahia grass or with Bahia grass plus the Ashinomene. And the split plot was for the nitrogen fertilization. In there we have with and without nitrogen fertilization. We planted 10 kilograms of Ashinomene as inoculated seed by each year, and we make an overall fertilization with phosphorus and potassium. For the variables, we analyzed first the forage characteristics, forage accumulation, and crude protein concentration. We analyzed more, but we don't have time today to explain that. By doing that, we make 4 harvests per year, and with that, we lift by each harvest 15 centimeters stubble height, and we perform this harvest each 35 days. For the nitrogen cycling processes, the first one, nitrous oxide, we use the closed static chamber technique. By doing that, in each sampling, we performed 4 samplings of air and at 0, 10, 20, and 30 minutes after closing the chamber. Later, we took those vials to gas chromatography to analyze the concentration of nitrous oxide. For the litter disappearance, we use the nylon bag technique. By doing that, when we performed the last harvest of Ashinomene in each year in September, part of that material we use it to dry it and to fill the bags. We try to maintain also the proportion of Ashinomene and Bahia grass in those plots that require, and we left those bags into the plots for 184 days, retrieving the bags, some bags in between of that time, just to calculate the litter disappearance. And by doing that, we use the residues of those bags to calculate the disappearance of organic matter and nitrogen. And finally, with the soil nitrogen cycling gene abundances, for that we performed 4 soil tests in the year. One before nitrogen fertilization, the other one after, 2 weeks after the nitrogen fertilization at the last harvest in September, and at the end of the year. And with that, we calculated the amount of the gene abundances of genes related to nitrogen fixation, nitrification, and denitrification, using that qPCR analysis. As a result, first of all, we have the biomass accumulation. In that, we have like an effect by the time, mainly. And if you can see the table in the first line with the total forage accumulation, we could see that those plots, like in total biomass production, they produce more biomass at the second month, in July. And that is explained because in the first month, in June, we harvest, and after that, we apply the nitrogen fertilization. So actually, the second month, that response is related to what happened after the fertilization. And because we are working with Bahia grass, that grass is very sensitive to nitrogen. But on the contrary, with the Ashinomene forage accumulation, we saw like a different response, because you could see that in June and July, the growth of the legume was very low. But in August, the legumes start growing very fast. And we could explain that is by the harvests themselves, because in that way, by each cut, we were stimulating the lateral growth of the Ashinomene. And by doing that, we are having more stems, more leaves, and more biomass. For the crude protein concentration, here we have 2 interactions. The first one between the forage season and the month in the figure A, and the second with the nitrogen fertilization and the month in the figure B. In the A, we could see that those plots with Ashinomene produced more crude protein than those with the only Bahia grass. that, well, was explained by the protein content of the Shinomene. And you could see that that effect increased month after month. On the contrary, with the nitrogen fertilization, we saw similar response only in July, after the nitrogen fertilization. But after, in where those plots were, with fertilization produced more crude protein than those without. But that effect just happened that month. In August and September, the effect disappeared. With the nitrous oxide emissions, this is like the average between treatments and years, because we didn't have effect by our treatments in the response, but we have effect in time. You can see in there two peaks that appears. The first one was expected because we have the nitrogen fertilization, but the second one that happened at the second month, we didn't expect that and was against our hypothesis. And you can see even that second peak is longer than the first one. So we had, I will try just to explain this, look in relation with all the responses. And at the end, we could saw that that second peak started at the moment when the legume start to grow faster. So it could be a good explanation with that. And besides, that happened also because in that month, precipitation started again. So actually, we have more humidity in the soils. So you can see there like a connection between events. Having more humidity of soils could stimulate the growth of Achinomene, besides with the harvest effect, and that make the environment and the amount of nitrogen to stimulate the denitrification. For the litter decomposition, we have similar responses between organic matter and nitrogen. At the beginning, there was a high disappearance of the nutrient in this case. But after the second month, the situation of the nutrient just stabilized. Well, almost, because you can see that even at the end, they have like a little slope in that figure. So actually, that means that the decomposition could continue, but we didn't measure it because we don't have enough time. The difference here is you can see that the nitrogen disappearance was lower than the organic matter. And that could be related by the presence of the Bahia grass, because the Bahia grass has a lot of low solubility fibers. And because of that, those fibers could be linked with the nitrogen and produce this kind of effect. That maybe is something that is not that bad, because actually that means that probably we don't have a good amount of nitrogen for the next crop. But for the other months of the years, that will continue better. For the nitrogen cycling abundances, here I am showing how it happened with the genes related with nitrification. And in this case, we have the archaea and the bacteria. In both, we could saw that there is like a high amount of increase in the gene abundance in July. Happened the same with other ones that is related with the nitrogen fertilization. And the main difference that you could see here, that if you want, you can detail the units of the figures. Because in the archaea, we are talking about thousands. And the bacteria, the V, we are talking about common numbers. That could be also explained because these soils are acidic, are low nutrients, and that make oligotrophic conditions. And actually, the archaea prefer those conditions to grow. So actually, makes sense. And the second, with the denitrification genes, in here we have also similar effect with the previous one. In July, the second month, by the fertilization, and in there, we can see like the relation that could happen between nitrification and denitrification, having a higher amount of nitrogen in the soil. And finally, to conclude, we could show that overseeing Achinomene into Bahia grass pastures increased pasture nutritive value, but without increasing nitrous oxide emissions. That was a very good thing to know. The nitrogen fertilization have effect. It increased forage accumulation for sure, but it increased slightly the crude protein concentration. There was no effect of the treatments on organic matter and nitrogen disappearance. And finally, the treatments did not affect the nitrogen cycling microbial populations into the soil. Because we measured also nitrogen fixation and the population of nitrogen fixers, that I didn't present that data here, we could see, we could like say that it's likely that Bahia grass pastures already has nitrogen fixing microorganisms before all the experiment. Well, that is the information I have for today. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, well, now I know that we have 15 minutes. Yay. If not, I have here some business cards if you want to reach me later.
Thank you, Jaime. Just briefly before we start the questions, just to let everyone know, the next speaker I don't think has shown up. And so we're going to keep this time schedule as published. So if you're willing to
Yeah, of course.
answer as many questions as people have, kind of remind you of a defense. So
Yes.
let's go.
Nice. Yes, sir.
As a producer, you know, who is roughly in the region of Georgia, do you think astronomy, A, is it palatable to cows, and B, you know, do you think it's economic to try to use as an overseeded pastures to get more animal performance, animal gain per acre, that kind of thing?
Well,
Just repeat the question so it gets recorded.
okay, well, the question was related if using Ashinomen in Georgia could be like as productive as having another methodologies, even with because it could be not palatable and for the other costs, right? Okay, well, I cannot speak in Georgia because for sure those are different characteristics, different economic issues in there. But what I learned with the Shinomene, at least in Florida, is not unpalatable. Actually, the cows love it, and they go first for that one. So actually, you need to be careful with the stubble height, because if not, they just go over there and eat everything. But the second one was a little economic analysis that I did for my thesis. Well, not published, but I did. Okay. So actually at this point, with the increase of the cost of the fertilizers, just by applying the Ashinomene or applying the fertilization, you will have the same expenses. So it's not that one is better than the other one economically, it's the same. But the good thing, as we saw in the figure, the effects of the Ashinomene will stand longer in the pastures than the fertilization. Well, he's asking if it's perennial or annual. The Ashinomene is annual. But the good thing is he's reseeding. So actually, it produces seeds, and you will have those seeds for the next session, for the next season.
Two quick questions. One is, do you measure botanical composition of the Bahia grass to Ashinomene? Because I do a lot of work with Ashinomene, and I see that it doesn't like a lot of competition. So does that have any effect on your emissions? And the other question is, you talked about seeing those emissions picking up in August. Do you have a bare soil comparison where you might have a lot of microactivity in August when it's humid and hot that might be spiking that emission and not so much from the grass emission?
Well, the question is related to if for the soils, when the nitrous oxide happened, how was the situation with the bare soil, right? And the first one was, how was it? If I measure botanical composition, sorry, thank you. Yes, actually, you are you are saying about one of the situations that we have with the Ashinomene, and actually could be a good response because we don't have any, well, in some responses, we don't have any significance by the treatments. And that was because in the first year, the Ashinomene was awesome. Just was growing well, has like 10% of botanical composition, maybe more, was happy. But the second year, actually, we changed the location just for figuring things out how that will work in similar situations, similar conditions, but different locations. And in that way, the Ashinomene didn't thrive. So that's why, yeah, that's for sure one of the things that is necessary to establish this legume is just to try to figure things out with the soil to know in which place the Ashinomene will thrive better. And the second, my God, I'm so sorry. The
Second was, do you have a bare soil?
The bare soil. Yes, sorry. I have my mind in another part. Yeah, well, we didn't measure this thing with bare soil, but because in the station, everything is covered with Bahia grass. And those pastures has had a lot of years in there. But I would say that having bare soil, the emission could be like greater, because at this moment with the Bahia grass, at least we have some effect that the Bahia grass is like taking that nitrogen that has been fixed or processed. With the bare soil, you will not have those characteristics, and even will be more sensitive to humidity. So actually, in that case, we don't have another factors in the soil that will decrease or retain the humidity just to try to maintain that in the cycle. In the bare soil, that will just be affecting everything directly, I would say. So I'm not sure, but I will say that.
I mean, I was going to initiate a question on palatability. I have some open pasture land landowners that have, they're managing the wildlife. Deer absolutely love this. They would drive them out and do some field visits, and you could just see where they would pass everything up. This was surely a good thing. The deer absolutely love this. If you're incorporating that in, you have the presence of wildlife present in any area. This is really good for the wildlife.
Yeah, and actually, another common name that would you recognize the Ashinomene in Florida is deer bitch. And that is because deer love it, and Professor Sollenberger actually warned me when we was making all the planification of the experiment that you need to put high fences, because if not, you will don't have deer Ashinomene in your plots. And yeah, that works. Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Jaime, or should we just kind of let him escape after? Let's thank him again.
Thank you.
Okay, once again, my clock says it's about 8 minutes until our third speaker. So, talk amongst yourselves.
Are you next? Is Klaus? Klaus is.
Oh, he just stepped out. Yeah, he just stepped out.
Oh, he's this one.
Is he the
Nope, that's you.
I,
I had him ordered, but I had him in the wrong order. Okay, you're. And you're fourth? Third, okay. So. This is Klaus. Klaus is lost? Okay. Okay, now it should be in order. Let me double check. Yeah, I can do that. It's usually easier that way. Yeah. Oh, are we missing 2 people? We must be, because there's 6 on the list.
So which one are we missing?
We're missing, I think, this Hanamant Holly.
And then Sarah.
And then Sarah.
So we're sorry. It's hard to get good help these days. That's on me, not on anybody else. I'm sorry. Apparently, we're missing the second and third speaker. So, yeah, you can go get a leisurely dinner.
Okay. We'll be ready for you now.
That's me. That's me. Oh yes, no, English. How do I move on? Is it shift?
Use this,
Or actually, I probably just want to do
or usually it's
that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the down arrow will work too.
Okay. Okay. Great.
You like this?
No, I don't. No, it's
Me either. I prefer the keys.
I feel like mine's a bit strange because I'm not a scientist, so there's no figures or data or anything. It's just me talking, really.
As long as it's good time. I can take your picture now before.
That's a great idea. Perfect. In fact, with that behind, it'd be good with the logo. So I look like a.
And I'll send it, if you're okay with it, to our social media team. If you want to be on the IGC
Okay.
page.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful.
Lovely. Thank you. Well.
Thank you, everyone. We'll get started with our next presentation. And it's Sarah Gregson taking off from the bottom up.
Pasture for Life is taking up off from the bottom up.
Well, then let's go for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. So I just want to preface this talk by saying that I am not a scientist. I am an agricultural graduate, but I'm actually a freelance agricultural writer and have been for the last 30 years. And I'm passionate about grass. And I've been to the IGC in China and Australia. So this is my third IGC. And so there are no figures or data or graphs in my talk. It is just talk and some photos. And so I would like to thank the IGC for letting me present today. So I'm going to be talking what is Pasture for Life and how is it changing, what part has research played in its development, and then I ask the question, can research change to accommodate complex and varied biological interactions, and what next for Pasture for Life? 10 years ago, Pasture for Life was a collection of about 50 UK farmers who were producing high-quality ruminant food products wholly from pasture, no grain whatsoever. They were regenerative farming pioneers, and the organisation was run by volunteers and funded by very small, numerous grants. In the past 2 to 3 years, membership has increased significantly, now nearing 1,000 farmers. And it's now run by a paid executive and is bursting with energy and conversation and learning. Members are mainly younger farmers, but do include butchers, chefs, vets, academics, and consumers. And they're all keen to champion the positive role of ruminants that they can play in pastoral ecosystems. But there is bottom-up learning. Farmers are working with other farmers on topics such as mob grazing, multi-species lays, breeds and breeding, biodiversity, animal welfare, carcass breakdown, and presentation of products for direct selling, the whole chain. Technology transfer is happening at farmer level, with study groups away, a very active internet forum, and farmer-to-farmer mentoring. And participation is growing still further with the formation of 15 regional local groups across the country, led by paid facilitators, carrying out local farm walks and workshops and developing local food supply. From a personal perspective, as a freelance journalist, it was always very hard for me to sell my Grassland articles into the mainstream farming press 10 or even 5 years ago. Now every publication will run 1 or 2 Grassland articles and will bite my hand off for grassland farming content. I have worked with Pasture for Life from the early days. I was a director for 7 years and took on the communications role within the small volunteer team. I was writing stories about innovative Pasture for Life farmers and getting them into the mainstream press to encourage other farmers to give it a go, perhaps. The rise in membership has been helped by the rising cost of farm inputs, pushing more farmers towards increasing production from grass, the cheapest way to feed a cow or a sheep. And environmental pressures have, for example, seen an upsurge in the sowing of multi-species lays to improve soil health and biodiversity, and this has also inspired interest in grass-fed production. So when Pasture for Life was formed 13 years ago, it was a vision of 3 men, 2 farmers and 1 inspirational retired academic called Dr. John Meadley. There was no research they could turn to show that raising and, importantly, finishing cattle and sheep purely on pasture was doable or profitable. There was no evidence that this kind of system would work. Back then, regenerative was not even a word that farmers in the UK had even heard of. But the original farmers could see what was happening on their farms. Their animals were healthy and fertile. The young stock was growing well. Their soils were holding more water. The wildlife was coming back to their farms. They were selling nutrient-dense food that was tasty, and local buyers were always coming back for more. With no hard feed to buy, their input costs were cut significantly. Half the farmers were also organic, so there were expensive fertilizers weren't there to buy either. So 5 years ago, agroecologist Dr. Lisa Norton from the UK Centre for Hydrology and Ecology, based at the University of Lancaster, was the first scientist to come to Pasture for Life, interested to find out how she could work with our farmers. In 2018, she became principal investigator on a global food security project called Sustainable Economic and Ecological Grazing Systems, Learning from Innovative Practitioners, shortened snappily to SEGSCLIP. This project worked with Pasture for Life and its farmers to evidence their practices and investigate whether this farming system could contribute to long-term sustainability of livestock management in the UK. Dr. Norton has published 3 pieces of work so far from this study, and I'll talk briefly about a couple of them. So the first one was, can pasture-fed livestock systems practices improve the ecological condition of grassland in Great Britain? And the results were that Pasture for Life plots were more species-rich than those plots on agriculturally improved grassland. Pasture for Life plant communities contain tall vegetation, which is really good and positive for biodiversity and insects. And the Pasture for Life approach may be beneficial for grassland and wider ecosystems. On a second, much bigger piece of research, which she actually looks at a much wider system, she was looking at learning from innovative practitioners, evidence for the sustainability and resilience of pasture-fed livestock systems. And she states, there is an urgent need for transformational change in agriculture to address current and future issues caused by climate change, biodiversity loss, and socio-ecological disruption. But change is slow to come and is hindered by a lack of transdisciplinary evidence on potential approaches which take a systems approach. So her results showed that the Pasture for Life approach is resilient and viable. It does contribute to wider public goods. Farmers who have been members were measuring their soil carbon and had the highest levels of soil carbon, and the nutritional quality of beef from Pasture for Life systems exceeds that from conventional systems. It also reveals that learning and adaptation of practice through farmer experience is central to farming using agroecological approaches. She also did a lot of qualitative research, and some of the key findings from that were that Pasture for Life farmers are motivated to do more than simply make a profit. They desire to achieve optimum, not maximum production, looking at the value that they're producing in the system. They were looking at new ways of grazing, mob grazing, tall grazing, rotational grazing. And all of it was bottom-up practical experimentation. So it is clear that social goods such as learning, generosity to others, and trust are generated through the flow of exchange of on-farm trials, results, and experiences. So she says at the end of her paper, reductionist scientific approaches have so far limited our ability to provide evidence which can support transformational change in agriculture. And there are many research projects now looking at, down a single lens, maybe at multi-species lays, but not looking at what's happening under the ground or over the ground or with the animals or production and the farmer. And they're almost validating what the Pasture for Life farmers have been doing for years, and the results, usually the Pasture for Life farmers say, yeah, no, I know that, I've been doing it for years. So we need a new era in which farmers and researchers build new knowledge together using holistic, transdisciplinary approaches. And although it is starting. I mean, I've been really pleased at this conference to talk to researchers that are saying they are just starting to do this. We're starting to do more multi-systems type approach. Just briefly, what now for Pasture for Life? The environment in which Pasture for Life is now working has changed significantly from when it started, and regenerative farming is now a buzzword in the UK. And interestingly enough, while 100% pasture-fed is still incredibly niche, it feels like we are moving forward. The future looks good as membership numbers rise to 1,000 and beyond. There are plans for a new website with a members-only area to house a question and answer forum, and the Pasture for Life marketplace where 100% grass-fed animals can be traded. There's now a very active research group led by an inspiring Pasture for Life farmer, and we have now been asked to take part in a big Pathways European-funded project looking at sustainable practices along the production chains from European livestock sector. And 20 Pasture for Life farmers have met online to form a UK practice hub, specifically looking at Pasture for Life as one potential pathway. There's great learning happening in Pasture for Life between the farmers, and it's in an environment of a trusted partnership and collaboration. Long may this continue. Thank you.
I need to apologize. I can't tell time. I
Oh,
stood
did
up
you?
too
Oh,
early,
did you? Oh, no.
and I'm afraid that Sarah rushed. So she's got 5 minutes for questions. Anybody question in the back?
So I was curious about the producer interest in things beyond making a profit. I see that in some of the producers I work with, but typically they pay for the farm. And folks that haven't paid for the farm are much more looking at how do I make the note to pay the banker. And I'm wondering if that dynamic occurs in your, if you've observed any of that or not.
So is this owner occupiers versus rented people who are renting?
Well, and if you rent, you make even less investment because you don't know what the length of your lease is going to be. In many cases, there's often done on a handshake. And so conservation practices or other methodologies that would, be perceived as more sustainable are less likely to be engaged, I think, in cases where the producer is not the landowner. And that's increasingly the case.
Yeah. I think we've got a fairly even spread of owner-occupiers and renters, and I think they're driven by, obviously they're driven by profit. All farmers have to make a profit to reinvest, but I think they're finding that bringing biodiversity back, producing good nutrient-dense food that consumers want more and more of, I think that's driving it more than anything else. So they are capturing it, most of them are capturing a premium, but they're probably because they're direct selling or doing box schemes or through farm shops. So they are getting maybe a 2 or 3% premium on sending it to the slaughterhouse or the processor.
Great to see a journalist talking. Great to see evidence of small group farmer learning from one another.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm interested in your view of this word regenerative farming. Is it just a new label to market what you need to be doing?
Kind of repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. So is regenerative farming, is it a label that's
For what has been done.
for what's been done? I think I remember 10, 11 years ago talking about regenerative farming, and the farmer said, "Oh no, you can't mention that word because nobody knows what it means." It has this in the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of people have jumped onto it because it's something different, and of course at the NUB, at the Pasture for Life NUB, there's so much going on that's good, but we are seeing more. The more industry as a whole now using regenerative, and it's kind of losing its. It could be. I want to call it greenwash, but it's greenwash. Greenwash, but not Pasture for Life.
Yeah, with respect to this word regenerative farming, as far as nutrients are concerned, how do you get nutrients
So half our farmers are, sorry, do the farmers use, are they organic? So half of them are organic because that's how they feel they want to be, but half are using fertilizers because they got to produce the hay or the silage to feed the animals through the winter with no grain. So no, it's just the dung. It's the cycling of the dung with the animals. And I guess for some of the biodiverse swards, that's kind of what you're looking for. No feeds at all. It's just grass. So, well, they make their own hay. No. Yes, there's clover. There's lots of clover. Lots of clover.
In the U.S., we've seen that a lot of farmers that using regenerative grazing are going to forming clubs where they can process their animals and localize instead of going to the processor. Are you seeing the same thing happening here?
We're losing our abattoirs, I think, at a rate of 10%. I'm not quite sure whether it's a year or, but that's a real problem because our cattle have to travel hours. I mean, maybe not as far as in the US, but it's a real problem. So most of our farmers are direct selling, so through farm shops and through box schemes. So sending meat out nationwide through box schemes. So.
I don't know how to use Apple. Thank you. Hand for Sarah. Sorry, just ran into a technical difficulty. Sarah, would you like your water?
I would like water.
So while we're looking for the new presentation, I'll take you in your hands, and we're jumping into the water from the British Islands to the east, swimming, getting ashore to the Netherlands, crossing that, and we're coming to Germany. And we're also scaling up from Jaime's one field to Sarah's several fields, and all to all fields in Germany. The German government is aware of the importance of grassland and the contribution of grasslands to all sorts of ecosystem services. And they would need to report about ecosystem services, for example, greenhouse gas emissions or nitrate leaching as a disservice, but also they're interested in yield outlooks. The problem with many of those ecosystem services and disservices over a large country, they are not observable, measurable in that sense. So we do have some points, but we have difficulties to get it for the whole country. So what we use in that case, and what people have used in the past years, maybe decades, is that we try to use simulation models to get a picture. Yeah, and simulation models would then also help us to get this outlook projected into the future. Now, for those that are not familiar with the type of simulation models that I'm referring to, these are the differential equation models. It's basically you grab one of those variables that you're interested in. For example, Jaime's N2O emissions, and then you see, okay, what is coming in and what is getting out, and the difference of that is how the state variable changes from day to day. Yeah. Speaking of, the colleague is gone right now, the conservation of matter as a first law of thermodynamics. If you put all those processes that you're interested in, that you know of, together, you end up in having such a scheme here, which pretty well describes physiology of a plant with photosynthesis and ontogenesis and everything, and that is what we commonly refer to as a crop model. Now, if you expand that with all the processes that are in the soil, soil organic matter turnover, water dynamics, nitrogen dynamics, carbon dynamics, whatever, we're ending up in having an agro-ecosystem model. And that's the type of model that we're using here. So, mathematically, these type of models are one-dimensional, so they just have a depth, but they don't have a space. So what we can do is we can simulate a temporal dynamics, here a typical crop rotation from agronomy, but if you want to get this into space, you need to have a grid and then run for each grid cell one of those simulations, and then you end up with studies that are looking at soil organic carbon dynamics over time for the state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, as an example. And then if you do this for Germany, you could sort of come up with something like this, which shows how climate, especially drought, impacts a maize crop in every corner of Germany over a couple of years, just as a demonstration of what these things can do. Now, we're here in the Grassland Congress, so we'll forget about the crop rotations for a while and look at, okay, how can we explain or how can we teach such a model to represent grasslands across Germany? Because grasslands are highly variable. There is not one grassland that is similar to the other. So that is sort of one of our preconditions. We are concentrating at first on the intensively managed grasslands, because here, due to the high input of nitrogen, we're getting a fairly similar composition of species. And that is what we're trying to represent first. We need to have a parameter set for the model that represents this type of grassland, and here we have applied a triple objective parameter optimization looking at that one is biomass, and then we have the leaf area index up there, and then we have the soil moisture. So 3 different variables where the model needs to fit at the same time. Mathematically, 3 objective is already a challenge, but that is as far as we can go, because many of the sites that we've used have recorded not much more data than just that. And we're happy to have some of those stations that have recorded that. So once we have parameterized the model to represent that grassland, you could potential that Germany was covered all with grassland. You could do sort of an outlook on how yields develop, in this case, under different cutting regimes. 2 cuts, 3 cuts, 4 cuts, 5 cuts, and the yield that would emerge from that on an average over a couple of years. Now, this type of models that we use have a certain demand for input information. And that typically goes along the triad of genotype times environment time management. That is also something that we borrow from the crop science. Here in this case, we start with, okay, where do we actually have the grasslands? Because right now we assume that Germany is all covered with grasslands. So remote sensing delivers a crop type map. In this case, 22 different crops, including grassland, at a scale of 10 meters. That is for each and every field in Germany. We know what has been cropped. We have this for several years, which then gives us the information also on the crop rotation. So we know the crop rotation for each and every field in Germany. Now you see that these colors change, but some colors don't change. The green one actually doesn't change. That is the permanent grassland. So by extracting all those that change, you remain with what is not changing, and that is the permanent grassland. So now we know where the grassland is across Germany. Still, we assume it's all intensive grassland. That is not true. We'll forget about that, and we're not returning to that because that is projection of research to the next years. The next thing we're going to look at is the detection of mowing events. And now this is what we also get from remote sensing. This is looking at grasslands at different points of time, and we get a vegetation index that shows you how much biomass is on the field at different time. And we are, again, here comes mathematics in. We're fitting a convex hull to that as an ideal course of this vegetation index. And then we discover that there is one point that actually deviates a lot from this ideal curve, and that is the mowing event. So we identify those peaks and then check again if it really qualifies. Is that really something that looks like a mowing event? And then we can come up across Germany with a map that shows, okay, which of those fields that we have identified as a grassland has received how many mowing events. Yeah, so here we have another indicator, a proxy maybe, as for the land use intensity. That gives us also a bit more information that we could use in the models. Okay, let's turn to something different here. Many of the grasslands that we have in Germany are grasslands because you cannot grow anything else on it because of the geological or the hydrological conditions. Yeah, let's turn to the hydrological conditions. Many of those grasslands are lowland grasslands. They are flooded over winter, or they have like a very, very shallow groundwater level. This is one of these. And this is early in the season, and you see already the heterogeneity of, this is again the vegetation index, of the yield of the biomass that is emerging there across one field. Yeah, and here we have the low yielding areas are the ones that have been flooded in winter, and the high yielding areas are the ones that are on sandy patches. Yeah, and the sandy patches, they are a bit higher elevated than the organic soils that are surrounding them because they have lost a lot of carbon over the last 100 years or maybe 200 or more years because they are managed and they receive a lot of oxygen, so they're losing mass and they're sinking down. So they're like 20 centimeters lower or even more. So they get flooded and the sandy patches remain dry. So they, in this situation early, they get a higher yield. Later in the season, this changes, because then it gets dry and the lower patches, they get ascending capillary water from below, so they have now the better productive situation, while the sandy patches, they are really dropping dry, and here the yield goes down. So, I mean, this is really difficult to predict, and that is something that we are working on right now with a postdoc and a PhD to figure out how we can do that. All right, you're rising already. I'm getting into time trouble here. So from another project where we look at which fields are irrigated across Germany, we get sort of an irrigation probability, and we see the nice center pivots, something like the blue circles here that you have a lot from here in the US, but we don't have them in Germany so much. So we really need to look at, okay, what is irrigated and what is natural water supply. So this is a zone where we are close to the river, and that is probably natural water supply. So this is the irrigation map. Here we just have 1 and 0, irrigated, non-irrigated across Germany. Here demonstrated for 2 states. And if you take this information and bring in the terrain elevation and the groundwater isohypses, which we get from groundwater observations, then we get to the probability of natural water supply through ascending capillary water. Another very useful information for the biomass prediction, because here we cover mainly the lowland grasslands. Okay, one last thing. The basic assumption for the process models was that those parameters describing the growth of the plant are constant over time. That is how the models work. What we have found in these lowland grasslands is that if the groundwater is managed and the scheme is changed over time, the composition of the species will adapt to the hydrologic situation. And that is, so here you have this relationship between mean groundwater level and the species composition, dry species, moist species, and that has an impact on the biomass that you get. And that means that our assumption is actually violated. Yeah? So the species composition changes with the water regime, and that is why we cannot use our simulations model. So the next step will be to bring in another simulation model, and that is a one that simulates the competition between different species around water, radiation, nitrogen. Combine this with a simulation model, and we have Katrin Kuka here in the room who has pioneered this already long ago for carbon and nitrogen. And here we're bringing carbon and nitrogen and biomass in, so going one step further to be able to simulate all these services and disservices over time for Germany. Thank you very much. This one here?
The one where you have the right in the beginning.
This one here, yes.
You were going to prioritize one or two of those responses for field management to improve model predictors. If you have an idea of which one would you go with?
Yeah, this is okay. So which of those parameters would you prioritize when starting to looking into such a system? Here you need to balance, okay, the importance against the feasibility of measuring this, and here comes the difficulty. Photosynthesis is probably the most important one. That is also one that is most difficult to measure. Luckily, it is also more or less general across a large amount of plants. So we can assure that people who've done this in the 1970s, 80s have done a good job, and it's still valid. What we're now looking at, for example, is the response of the crop to the water availability in the soil, because that has not been looked at in isolation so much. So we're looking at this. Nitrogen response, for example, we have loads of information on that. But water is actually a bit difficult because the root in the soil is also responding very dynamically, even more for crops than for grasslands, because here the root system is a bit more shallow. Yeah, but that's what we're looking at right now.
Thank you very much, Klaus. All right, thank you. Last speaker in our session is boldly going to the computer.
If you feel comfortable, go ahead.
The title is Silvopastoral Restoration to Enhance Ecosystem Services and Increase, farmers' income. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that important, is farmers' income?
Yeah.
Yes.
And okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. So we're gonna travel south of the Mediterranean, and I'm gonna talk about restoration of silvopasture. It's a semi-arid area. It's in Tunisia. What I'm gonna present, so I will give you a brief idea about the causes of silvopasture degradation, the objective of the study, the approach, some restoration technique which we used, results, and then key recommendation. I think we can all agree that climate change is the most challenging things which farmer and even policymaker are facing. Strange enough, this year, like in Tunisia, we didn't get any rain in the fall and the winter. And a week ago, we started getting rain, and we had flooding. Actually, one person died. In Rome, I heard this week, 5 people died because of flooding. So it's crazy. So there is change in the rainfall pattern, frequent and severe droughts, and then higher temperature, and so on. So this will affect our restoration. The next one, which I think we heard most of it in the EMI presentation today in the plenary, some of the key challenges and causes of what's happening in grassland, rangeland, and so on. We always blame things on overgrazing, but people don't have like misinterpretation of what's overgrazing. They always blame it on like high stocking rate. But to be frank, it's about timing of the grazing. And you can have like 10 sheep grazing in 10 hectare or 50 hectare, you still get overgrazing because you allow the sheep to select the most palatable species before going to the next. So that's like, to me, it's number one. And people, they always think that protection is good for rangeland, especially like perennial ryegrasses. And you can see this image here. So I went to a park which has been protected for like 15 years, and I saw like everything is dying. That's oxidation of the perennial grasses. Photosynthesis cannot take place, and the whole system is collapsing. And people, they think we are doing the right thing, but I'm sorry, it's not. And then there is like disruption of the traditional grazing system. So people used to go like from place to place. It's migration, it's mobility, but it's not happening anymore. And it's even sometimes forced by the government to have these people have settlement and settle in one place. So this has also caused, there is not enough time for the natural vegetation to recover. And with nowadays, people, before they used to walk like hundreds of kilometers, maybe over like a month or so now. They just get a phone call, they load the sheep in a truck, they carry the water, and they go. So there is no time, so it's crazy. The other one is the encroachment of agricultural practice and afforestation. I think we heard about the afforestation where planting tree in a place where there was no tree before. And there is a wave actually these days about planting billions of trees. I know in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in many, many countries. And so we just need land to plant tree because we have a target to plant 10 billion tree. I mean, that's their objective. And I'm sorry, it's harmful for the ecosystem. The other one is weak institutional support and policy. So most government, when the pastoralists, they cry, our sheep and livestock are dying, what they do, they give subsidies. And subsidy, they give like free or subsidized feeding, which will, okay, you will save your livestock, but it's at the expense of the rangeland and the grasslands, because the number of sheep, they never decline, even during like droughts. Because some people are really smart, they take advantage of the situation and they buy the livestock from the poor people at a very cheap price. They feed them because they can afford to buy feed, and then they sell them later at a higher price. So this is really harmful for the I would say for the ecosystem. Unclear land tenure. I mean, this has to do with the communal. It's tragic, and then there is lack of coordination among concerned institutions. So you find in many countries like more than one institution working on rangelands. Who's in charge? You don't know. I mean, and they blame each other. So this is something which it has to be fixed. Okay, so now suppose we have a degraded rangeland or a grassland, and we wanted to restore it. So there are some basic steps which I will go through these steps for you to really understand what it needs, and it's a bit complex. And you can, I mean, like the first step here is just to check the history. I mean, what happened in the site? It's like someone is sick, he goes to a doctor to do diagnostic. They will ask you, like, your father, your parents, does it have like diabetic, does it have cancer, and so on. So it's the same concept here we are doing. So the history, what happened in the past? Did we have fire? Did we have overgrazing? Did we have like encroachment of cultivation in this area or not? And then the context, are we gonna go for like forest production? Or do you wanna go for biodiversity, or you have something else which is in mind? And the last one is the risk. Sometimes we call them the assumption. I mean, now, of course, I mean, we are living under constant climate change, but it could be conflict, it could be anything else. So we have to take this into account. And restoration, I mean, people, they confuse between restoration, and it's easy to use restoration because it's more appealing. But in most cases, we are talking about rehabilitation. And it is like you are like in point A, you're going to go to point B. So at the present time and the future. And most projects, I'm sorry to say, they are keen on quick fix solution. They want to see results right away. And most projects are like 3-5 years. I mean, degradation took place over hundreds of years, and they want to see results in just few years. And this is, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. So this is something which it has to be taken into account. In the planning, you need really to take into account the social and cultural, the land tenure, the access, and everything. I mean, as maybe ecologists, people are really keen on restoration technique. What plant I'm gonna plant here? What technology I'm gonna bring here? What innovation? And they forgot like the essence, it's the people, the stakeholder. I mean, of the people living there who will be the owner of the process. And then to identify target groups which are homogeneous. So if you choose a place where there is like previous conflict between, I mean, even member of a community, you have nowhere to go. I mean, you're just wasting your time and money, and you will not achieve anything. You have to set the restoration priority and then decide what type of intervention. So the overall objective of the study is to improve the livelihood of the agro-pastoral community for increasing resilience, income, and capacity of the local population. And you can see here, this is the site when we first started in 2017. This is how it is right now. So, and I will show you what happened over the years. So, I'm going to continue with the steps. So there is a need for participatory and again, multidisciplinary. It's a key word. I mean, you don't think that just bringing ecologists or grassland manager, we're gonna fix everything. You need to have a sociologist, you need to have an animal breeder, and so on. And two questions which you need to ask is the need for restoration, is it a community driven or driven by the outsider? Do you have a project which you have to finish in 3 years because you get the funding and move on, or you want to have everlasting impact? And then the second is how to mobilize and solicit community support. I mean, how to convince these people that whatever you are doing, it's for them. I mean, you're not gonna take anything, I mean, if you had more forage, you're not gonna bring your sheep and graze there. So two things, you need to agree on a common goal, and then second is to set up a solid governance. If you don't have this one, I mean, likelihood to succeed is doubtful. Then you have to restore the physical environment. You don't rush into planting trees or plants or whatever you do. So there is like, I mean, most of these grassland and shrublands and rangelands, they don't have like plain terrain. It's a topographic, I mean, it's uneven, it's hilly. So you need to really to stop the erosion first and fix the loss of soil. So like what we did here, we did gabion, we did contours, we did benches. This is just simple scarification. I mean, the soil is crusted. If you have rain, what does it do? It does, lead to erosion. The soil seed bank, there is seeds there. They cannot germinate because of the soil crust. So you need to really to scratch the soil. It's like the hoof action of wildlife. And then you'll see amazing thing happening. The next thing, now we're going to the biota. It's the choice of the species. You need to choose as much as possible indigenous species. Select multi-purpose species because you will get the buy-in from the community. And then select species which require less maintenance. You don't need to guard these species. Otherwise, they will be grazed and you'll not last. And the focus of the presentation will be on this one because it's a grassland, so it's the strata, the herbaceous strata. It's about Herdizanium coronarium. It's a native species from the Mediterranean Sea. It's a biennial species. It's a drought resistant. It has very high crude protein from 15 to 25. It's a melliferous species. So you name it, it has all the benefits. Just to show you the productivity here, it's like tenfold out of the, if you compare it to the control, it's an amazing, productivity. This is under rain-fed condition. We are not talking about any, and there is no amendment or fertilization or anything. For the soil fertility, this is 3 years after seeding. You can see everything is significant compared to the control. With the gabion we did, we restored, we saved 5 tons of per square kilometer of soil. The bottom line, when it comes to the farmer, is the cost. People used to spend $1 per day per sheep, per head of sheep. If they don't have, with the solar, we decreased the feed cost by 80%. And this was really, to them, amazing. And they started just give us the seeds. We will plant them in our yard, in our farm, just even, half hectare or not much, but they will get enough to feed their animals. So I'm almost done because you are standing. So the basic steps of restoration or rehabilitation, first is to agree on the common goal. Second, and most important to me, is to set up a solid governance. If you don't have this one, trust me, don't go for the rest. It's just a waste. And then you have to determine a strategy and method, remove the source of degradation, if it is overgrazing, if it is shrub or maybe over encroachment or cultivation, restore the physical environment, as I said, restore the biota, and you have to be patient. I know these projects are in a hurry, but it takes time really to restore a site. Some of the success factor which you need to take into account, it's a multi-stakeholder engagement and institutional collaboration. The more you have people engaged in this effort, the more likely you will succeed. It should be a long-term investment. I'm not talking about too much, a lot of fund. But you should really support these people in terms of timing. It's not just you do it for a project for 2-3 years and then you go and you expect them to continue. It's unlikely. So they need really long-term investment. And then you have to have favorable and supportive national and local policy processes, use of local practices and knowledge. I mean, indigenous knowledge is key. Don't think that you have a PhD, you're gonna bring something miracle for them and they will take it. And then you have to empower the community to own the process. Using a particular intervention on the restoration of the degraded, it's site specific. You cannot say that whatever I showed you here, you can take it as it is, go somewhere else and duplicate it. It doesn't work that way. You have, I mean, you have to tune it up to fit the system. I mean, there is a need, this is again, it's about the governance to set up community-based. Access to resources. After you do all this effort, I suggest that there should be a remuneration. I mean, it should be a small fee. If it is really free to graze, it's they don't really appreciate it. I mean, in my opinion, it may not last because they will be competing for it and it will be like a disaster. So small fee is to show that there is something from their end to spend to own it. And the more time we invest in the planning phase, the more chance for success. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming to the half hour, this is the end of this session. If you want to get to other papers, fine, but since there's no talk after this, if you have questions or for any of the speakers, let's use the time well, or whatever you need to do. Thank you for coming.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Yes, Phil.
Many of the results with Sula look impressive, but it's a short season printing. How do you, does it require resowing every few years? Is that part, 2 or 3 years, is that part of the model?
It's a good question. So it depends, and you can use the microphone. Yeah, because it's, I mean, it goes with the rainfall. So there is a way how to manage it. So the question goes with either you have to reseed it every 2 years, but also do you graze it directly or do you cut it? So like the first 2 years, I don't really graze it. I let the seed shed, so it does regenerate, so I don't have to reseed in many cases. It does recruit by itself, and it's amazing. And I mean, since 2017, I only reseeded once because it can come back by itself. That's another good question, because I can tell you one of the handicaps in our part of the world is finding the seeds, especially for forages. It's really a taboo, I mean, because no one is interested to invest in this. But luckily, in Tunisia, the government of Tunisia, he identified what we call like farmer for seed multiplication. So he collected the seed, he gave the seed to the farmer, they produce the seed, and then he buys it from them at a high price, let's say like at $1. And then the government reinvests the seed, which he collect, in development project to restore grassland, but also as a rotation in cropping land. So people who crop like wheat, after like 3-4 years, they plant like solar to rest the land, and then to improve the soil and so on. So the government here is intervening to really make the system works. In other country, I haven't seen this at all. Yeah.
It's a pity there's not a lot more people here to listen to your principles of change. I sat here thinking of working with New Zealand farmers that achieve change in some practice, and just about all your principles I was just picking
Yes.
up, irrespective of whether it was restoration in your area or some practice change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well done, great set of principles.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I was curious about the policy side. I mean, I appreciate the government's involved in this in intervention and administration, but I also think about how policy often prevents us from
Yeah, that's another good question. So, I have been, promoting the use of indigenous species because really we have really fantastic plants which are well adapted, but unfortunately, they were not taken up even by the government. And then there is one slide, we took it. When I have the trees, in the left I put Acacia sinophylla, and below it I put Cactus inermis. These two species are not native to Tunisia. And guess what? Most of our forest department nursery, which they have like 100, they produce Acacia sinophylla and Atriplex numularia. None of our native species is produced in these nursery. It makes me sick, really. So not too long ago, I communicated with them that we need to identify by ecoregion the native species which are adopted by the community or by the bottom-up approach, and then focus on them to produce the seedlings. And I mentioned multidisciplinary. So if you focus only on fodder and forage, farmer at this stage, maybe one day we will reach a maturity where people will understand that, to plant like some species just for their animal could be good. But for now, we need to go step by step. So there are certain species which are multi-purpose. So they provide the fodder, but at the same time they are melliferous, or they provide like some kind of essential oil or something, which could generate income for the community. And in the list which I listed in that slide, all the species I listed, they generate additional income for the community besides being a fodder species. Yeah, this is, what I'm able to, it's in my agenda as we speak. It's something. Thank you.
Questions for Klaus or Sarah are also welcome, but carry on.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, guys. Really, I appreciate your question and interest in the talk.
So, yeah, you said that you're not seeing that replicated in other countries.
Yeah.
What you've done here, are you able with others within those countries to start to influence change by using this as a practical
Yes.
study?
Yeah. So what I did actually, which I will present maybe in Australia in 2025, I developed what we call an SRM toolkit, Sustainable Rangeland Management Toolkit. And it has the principle here, and how, because I work in Sub-Saharan Africa, this is a Tunisia example, in many countries, in Tajikistan, and many countries. So, like Sulla here, I know some people they think Sulla they can plant it anywhere, and but they don't. If you don't have the rhizobium, it doesn't exist in the soil, it will not work. So you have to look for the species which are from that native, from native to the country, the target country. And the key again is the community. So there is community is a headache, and the next headache is the grazing. The grazing is like a bottom line. You do, you convince the community, you do the restoration. I didn't touch on the grazing here, but could be another talk. Because the grazing, it's not an easy concept. Remember what I say about protection, about overgrazing, how people they perceive it, and so on. These, we are still far away from this. People, even in the extension, they don't have the basic knowledge on when to graze, and so on. And they always think, I mentioned the stocking rate, because they think, okay, if they can determine the stocking rate, then they have a good system working. No, it's not. And anyway, so we'll see. Thank you.
I was struck by the pictures of transformation.
Oh, yeah.
Because in this country, we have many people that say, all you have to do is change your grazing management and look at what happens. It's like, well, yeah, and I think there's more to it than just...
More, much more. Phil.
Yeah, so, in the 80s and 90s, particularly, there were a lot of Australian scientists looking to implement bedding species, for example, in North Africa, and in many cases they worked beautifully, but when the scientists left,
Yeah,
development, and I gather it was largely due to community grazing and that sort of thing, lack of particular ownership.
exactly. It's
So, have you got anything, suggestions about how to better address that?
I mean, again, it's about people. I mean, as you said, I used to have like colleague in one department. He knows Sarkan. He knows it, Office of Livestock and Pasture. He retired. Now I'm having hard time to find a person who I can communicate, and he can do something to change like the life, to change the system. People are central, and what I'm seeing is a degradation, really, because as a discipline, for like. Herding and plant taxonomy, which they don't exist anymore, and the new generation are not keen on this at all. I mean, if I talk to my son, if he wants to go even farming, like agriculture, he said no way. I mean, everybody's in computer science and so on. So the trend, and another thing which is interesting, if you look at the gender, I mean, I was in Kuwait just before here. All my counterpart are lady, and they are really pro. I mean, this is something new. I haven't seen this before. I mean, they work on rangeland, and it's degraded. I mean, degraded landscape. You cannot imagine how bad it is. And they go and they collect, and they are really keen to learn. The boys, nobody is interested in in this field anymore. And I don't know, maybe 50 years from now, how the landscape will look like. I mean, it's crazy. But again, it's people who will make difference. If you don't have the right person in the right place, I mean, it can hurt the whole setup. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right. Thank you.